Those of you who have followed my channel know that I usually do some kind of tribute on this day of the year. Today, I'll be making something a little different. Many people know Ralph Rene primarily for his research into the alleged moon landings. But in addition to that, he was also a 9/11 researcher. In mid-2002, he began investigating the various information he had gathered, and he released a booklet titled WTC Lies and Fairy Tales. I honestly have not looked into 9/11 conspiracy theories in a long while, but over the years, I've received quite a number of emails requesting me to do a video on this subject. Many have also asked me for what I know about Rene's views on 9/11. Of all of Rene's non-moon landing writings, this is the only other subject by him that I can say I'm quite familiar with. The subject of 9/11 has been covered extensively by many researchers, and there's little point in reiterating their work here. Although it should be noted that Rene did independently arrive at many of the same conclusions regarding demolitions, missing bodies and planes at the Pentagon and Pennsylvania, and so forth. On the other hand, Rene did have a number of interesting and unique viewpoints that appear to have been overlooked. For example, the number of dead on 9/11 is frequently quoted to be around 3,000. But Rene believed the actual number to be closer to around 50,000. The Twin Towers were surrounded by many tall buildings. Other than Building 6, these were not evacuated and there would have been thousands of people within. Quite easily, at least half the people in these buildings would be distracted from their work and pressed up against a window watching the fires. When the explosions occurred, these windows were blown inward. In addition, demolition shrapnel, including steel girders, was flung at the surrounding buildings. Many of these standing behind the windows would not have survived. Yet FEMA mentioned no casualties in these buildings. Here is an overhead view of the buildings surrounding Ground Zero. On this he writes, "In fact, the explosions were so great that all the buildings near the towers had their windows blown in. FEMA never mentioned any casualties in the other buildings. Do you believe that the sides of these other buildings that faced the towers were not packed with Gawkers drawn from all the other businesses in each building? Would you have been able to continue your work under these circumstances? Do you know what happens to people looking out glass windows when the supersonic blast of compressed air from high explosive blows the glass shards into people packed up against a window wall?"
What did you do? I'm sorry.
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed a light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
Here we see a crowd of people gathering around the corner of Park Row and Beekman Street near the World Trade Center. There must have been over 1,000 people here. Other streets would likewise be packed with Gawkers. Rene writes, "I have chased an amazing number of fires in my life, and I have noticed that the bigger the fire, the bigger the crowd. Now a weekday fire of this magnitude in New York Central should have been the biggest draw imaginable. A few years before, I was one block north of the North Tower before 8:30 AM, and the sidewalks crawled with people. However, FEMA has the gall to tell us that only 10 Gawkers died. 2 100-ton planes get torn to pieces while ripping out 6 floors and passing completely through a building 1,000 feet above the street, raining down chunks of plain, concrete, steel and furniture and people over 10 square blocks of streets crawling with people who are not yet at work, and there are only 10 people killed? There is a photo on the corner of Park Row and Beekman Street, and the streets that converge there are totally filled with Gawkers. All eyeballs are up and almost all mouths are open. I immediately suspected that what they had just seen were the explosions that brought down the South Tower. From this corner, you could look south to see the top of the towers. This corner had to be typical of every intersection and street from which you could see the towers. These Gawkers had over an hour to gather. What about the huge plazas surrounding the WTC complex? This map shows the neighborhood surrounding the World Trade Center. The area shown in that photo is that small red part. As you can see, there's a lot of surrounding area for thousands more to gather and watch. When the towers came down, many of those watching from the streets would have been covered with heavy debris. Here's a street view showing the debris coming down. And here's another. On this he writes, "Here we see a wall of grey-black debris roaring down a canyon towards dozens of people running for their lives from the falling South Tower. The black wall contains hundreds of visible chunks of concrete." And here are shown huge chunks of steel and aluminium facade. These are blocks away from Ground Zero. FEMA later claimed that both buildings were almost completely empty because it was only 8:45 when the first plane hit. Then they tell us that the streets weren't crowded with people coming to work. They can't have it both ways. They had to be either under the buildings in the mall, in the buildings, or covering the sidewalks. The WTC was the hub of the entire financial district. Each of the many surrounding buildings also had hordes of people on their way to work. The EMS people, while being interviewed, claimed that many blocks away from Ground Zero, there were so many bodies in the streets that they had to drive over them while going in and out. But FEMA claims only 10 died in the streets. Who do you think is lying, the EMS heroes or FEMA? Renee also came across this article showing that New York City ordered over 100,000 body bags in the days following 9/11. That's a large number of bags for only 3,000 victims. Now, I was unable to find the FEMA quotes regarding the street deaths, but according to page 316 of the 9/11 Commission report, at most, 2,152 individuals died at the World Trade Center complex, and out of this total number of fatalities, we can account for the workplace location of 2,052 individuals. Subtracting these numbers leaves us 100 deaths that were not inside the buildings. Later figures specify that 2,606 died in the towers and on the ground. Included in that number are 411 rescue workers. Subtracting these and the 2,152 non-rescue workers within the WTC complex from the 2,606 figure tells us that only 43 civilians died in the streets outside the complex. Of course, this 43 number would no doubt be smaller if we subtract the unknown number of civilians who voluntarily stayed behind in the towers to assist the rescue workers. By their own admission, the 9/11 Commission excluded these volunteer civilians from the 2,152 non-rescue workers who died at the complex.
This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was the core at some point, and it looked like an oven. You know, it was just roaring inside. And it just had a bright, bright reddish orange color. See that stuff he's pulling out?
What was that, Chief?
We're gonna hold off on the water. See the stuff he's pulling out?
Yeah.
It's red hot. If we hit it too much steam, you won't be able to see what he's doing.
Great.
One of the most interesting pictures that Renee picked up on was this one. It shows the firemen standing around a hull emitting a bright light. Renee understood that this could not come from any burning substance such as sulfur or magnesium because there is no smoke. And the white colour of glow shows its temperature to be over 4,000 degrees centigrade, far hotter than any jet fuel or office furniture could burn at. He concluded that this glow was white-hot steel, melted by thermite. I too stared at the brilliance of white light. My first thought was, what is phosphorus doing in the basement? Then I noticed the absence of white smoke pouring out and the fact that nobody was choking. I decided it must be magnesium. But it couldn't be magnesium because there was no grey smoke either. Then the most unbelievable explanation entered my mind. There was only one possible answer. The light was caused by white-hot steel that had been created by thermite. The thermite had to have been placed there in great quantities for it to be still glowing over a day later. The absolute proof is found in the reports that on the same day, planes that flew over the site found places where the temperatures under the rubble was over 1000 degrees Fahrenheit.